The discussion around climate change, like so many other subjects in our country, has become corrupted by politics, emotion, and two sides smearing one another's policies and motives. But I believe that there is something to be learned from people who think that this is a big deal, and also from people who speculate that the issue is way overhyped. On a recent episode of Timeless, I interviewed Ethan Brown, the host of the Sweaty Penguin podcast, to hear his arguments for why climate change is a significant threat to our way of life. Today, I am pleased to welcome Steve Gorham, who has a bit of a different perspective. I'm Julie Hartman, and this is Timeless. Hey everyone, welcome to Timeless. As always, it's a joy to be with you. You know the drill. Hit the subscribe button down below if you like this content and you want to stay abreast of all of the new pieces of content that we are posting, whether it's Dennis and Julie, my show with Dennis Prager, or this show, Timeless. You can also follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Julie R. Hartman, and you can even email me at julie@julie-hartman.com. I love hearing from you. I only regret that I can't respond to each of you, but I do read all of those notes in full. Steve Gorham is an executive director of the Climate Science Coalition of America and an author of 4 books on energy, climate change, and sustainable development, with over 100,000 copies in print. Steve's new book, Green Breakdown: The Coming Renewable Energy Failure, came out on August 1st, 2023. Hello, Mr. Gorham. Welcome to Timeless.
Hi, Julie. Great to join you.
Thank you so much for being here. So as you know from the introduction, I really like interviewing people who have different perspectives on this hot topic, or some would say it's a cold type topic, or ever swinging topic, depending on the temperature. But I really appreciate your perspectives because, at least in the interviews that I've seen of you, you really keep it to science and data and facts. So let's start out with a pretty general question. Do you believe in man-made climate change?
So let me break that into 2 questions. The first is, do I believe in climate change? It's sort of interesting. I've never met a person in all my past history who doesn't believe the climate changes. We all believe the climate changes. The real question is, what is causing the change? And I think the evidence overwhelmingly shows that climate is driven by natural factors, the solar system, the atmosphere, the oceans, the earth, and not human greenhouse gases, or not your neighbor's SUV for that matter.
What is the evidence that you can cite that supports that claim?
So one of the first is that today's climate is not abnormally warm, despite what you read in the press. I think we had a headline in June that said it was the warmest month in 180,000 years, which is just flat out wrong. Since we've had thermometers since about 1880, climate has warmed about 1 degree Celsius, not very much, about 2 degrees Fahrenheit. But there are many indicators called proxies that scientists use to go back in history to estimate what temperatures are. And if you look at those proxies, you find that it was warmer 1,000 years ago when they had trees in southwest Greenland. It was warmer 2,000 years ago when the Romans conquered the Mediterranean. At that time, they were growing olives in what is Germany today. It was warmer 4,000 and 8,000 years ago than it is today. And so, and by the way, these were periods that were centuries long at a time when it was warmer than today. Today's temperatures are not abnormally warm. And just to give you a concrete example, there's a glacier in central Switzerland called the Rhone Glacier. Maybe some of your listeners have been there. It's wall-to-wall between 2 mountainsides. It's the headwaters of the Rhone River that flows out of Switzerland into France and down into the Mediterranean. But that glacier has been receding for more than a century. But every time it pulls back, they find things like wagon wheels under it, and they find horse bridles, and they find 4,000 years old pieces of wood. And one scientist estimated that this, for 6,000 of the last 10,000 years, there was no ice here. There was no glacier. So that is just one of an ocean of evidence that temperatures are naturally warmer many times over the last 10,000 years. And when you look at that, you say, well, today's warming probably is driven by natural factors, not man-made emissions.
So when we see headlines like the one that you just cited, that June was the hottest month in X many years, how do you explain that? Are people lying? Are they citing wrong, just flat out false data? How can we explain all of these people really getting behind that we are experiencing a huge climate change driven threat?
There's a pretty big bias going on. When one scientist comes up with a projection or an estimate, then the press takes it and they just spread it all over. And you see it in all these news outlets, USA Today, CNN, everything else. They take this, and there's never a challenge to this information. If you read an article in the press today, the odds are about climate change, the odds are that it's incorrect. Let me just give you an example that was revealed a couple weeks ago. A scientist by the name of Patrick Brown published an article in the New York Post, and it was an opinion article, and the title of it was, "As a scientist, I'm not allowed to tell the full truth about climate change." And he said to get published in a scientific journal like Nature, he has to put forward the narrative. He has to put forward the narrative that humans are causing dangerous climate change. If he doesn't do that, the article won't be accepted. So we do have a scientist that puts forward something, they think it's believable, but then the press just runs with it and there's never a challenge to it.
So we hear often that there have been more wildfires in the past 2 decades than in the preceding amount of comparative time. We also
Yes.
are hearing, for instance, in Los Angeles, just a few months ago, last winter, we had snow for the first time since, I believe, like 1932 or 1933. I was actually driving to work here in Glendale, California on the highway and watching the snowfall and thinking that I was hallucinating. We hear a lot about the erosion on our beaches, both here in the United States and around the world. So again, are those incidences that people are citing, are those just wrong?
Well, Governor DeSantis has gone on television with an interview in front of a forest fire and says, if you don't believe in climate change, come to California and look with your own eyes. And it is true that in the last decade, we've had 10 of the top 20 California wildfires in terms of structures destroyed. But again, the question is, what is causing those fires in California? And the federal government, and I forget the name of the commission now, but there was a commission in 2018 that took a look at the fires in California and said that fire suppression has been a big problem for almost a century now. Fires are suppressed, and they also said that fires are a natural way that forests remain healthy, and if you suppress the fires, you end up with a lot of dead wood and trees and disease. The U.S. Forest Service said also in 2018 that there were 147 million dead trees in California, and so when you have one of these fires, it's uncontrollable. It just burns in a huge way. Another factor is that forestry is down in California since the 1980s by about 60%. So you take all these factors, and there's 2 words for Governor Newsom. I hope I didn't say DeSantis, for Governor Newsom in California, and that is forest management. By the way, just 2 years ago, NASA revealed data, National Aeronautic and Space Administration, showing that global burned area has been declining for 15 years. NASA actually tracks every fire on the surface of the earth with satellites. They track the burned area. And we have like 10,000 fires that are burning every August across the world. But as NASA points out, the global burned area has been declining for about 20 years now. So then the question is, if global burned area is declining, how can fires in California be increasing because of climate change? And the answer is they can't. This is a forest management issue. If everybody drives an electric vehicle, you're not going to stop the fires in California.
So what about the incident of snow that I just mentioned? When people say, oh my gosh, it was the first snow in Los Angeles in 80, 90 years, evidence of climate change. What is Mr. Gorham's response?
Yeah, there was a special situation in the first part of this year. In the first 3 months of the year, we had a train of storms, a continuous train coming off the Pacific Ocean and dumping moisture on California. And they had record amounts of snow in places, they had record amounts of rain. And by the way, this happened way back in 1861 and 1862. For 2 months, they had this train of storms coming in off the Pacific, very similar to this year, which caused all the snow. By the way, at that time, they got 60 inches of rain in Los Angeles in 2 months. And you typically get about 10 inches in a year. 1862, again, the Mojave Desert looked like an ocean. They had 10 foot of water in Sacramento. They had to move the government to San Francisco till the water went down. And the biggest incident was the Central Valley in California. Literally, they had water from the Pacific Mountains to the inland mountains, 18, 20 feet high. All of the telegraph poles were submerged. And about a quarter of the cattle in California died during that period. So last spring, you had a very similar thing. Different now, we have more dams to hold back the water. But these are natural phenomena. These aren't things that are being created by a power plant. This is what the climate does periodically, and so that's what caused the snow this spring in California.
We hear a lot that the climate change problem really came to the fore during and after the Industrial Revolution of the late 18th century and early 19th century. And it does seem to be in accordance with logic that as human beings, started using factories and steamboats and eventually airplanes and all of our technological developments more, that we are releasing more carbon in the atmosphere and that is subsequently heating the world. Is it your position that the Industrial Revolution and the subsequent 2 centuries of human activity hasn't had a big effect on climate change, or do you acknowledge that it has?
Well, there is an effect. There is a greenhouse effect. Since about the end of World War II, we have had a big rise in the amount of atmospheric carbon dioxide that humans are putting into the atmosphere. It's gone up by orders of magnitude. But you have to go and so the theory is plausible, but you have to break down the greenhouse effect, which is sunlight enters our atmosphere. What isn't reflected by clouds is absorbed by the surface of the Earth. The Earth gives off lower energy infrared radiation. Most of that is trapped by greenhouse gases in our atmosphere, of which carbon dioxide and methane are those gases, and that does tend to warm the surface of the Earth. But that is overwhelmingly a natural factor. So when I speak to audiences, I ask them the question, which is Earth's dominant greenhouse gas? And the answer isn't carbon dioxide, it isn't methane, it's water vapor. Water vapor causes somewhere between 70 and 90% of Earth's greenhouse effect. And so if we look at the rough last quarter of the greenhouse effect, that's mostly due to carbon dioxide and some methane and other gases. But then if we say how much of that last quarter is due to our industry versus natural factors, we find that that last quarter is overwhelmingly caused by exchanges of carbon dioxide in nature. The oceans have 50 times as much carbon dioxide as what's in the atmosphere, and they're always exchanging it. When plants die, they release carbon dioxide. When they grow, they absorb it. And every day, nature puts 20 times as much carbon dioxide into the atmosphere as all of our industries and removes about the same amount. So overwhelmingly, if you break down the greenhouse effect, nature, both water vapor and natural carbon dioxide, dominate the greenhouse effect. Man-made emissions are only about 1 or 2% of Earth's greenhouse effect. That means if we put all the CO2 in the atmosphere, we probably are not going to see and be able to measure a difference in global temperatures.
Can you explain briefly what is water vapor and where it comes from?
So water vapor is the gaseous component of water. We have this big water cycle on Earth. We have the oceans, we have the ice caps, we have rivers and streams, and we have a lot of water vapor in the atmosphere. And those sometimes condense into clouds as well. And we have this huge water cycle, which is many orders of magnitude bigger than the carbon dioxide cycle. And this is probably the cycle that most directly controls Earth's climate, the water cycle. not all this emphasis on carbon dioxide. Scientists are obsessed with the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere when water is a much, much bigger factor.
So I want to understand your position. Please jump in and correct me if I'm mischaracterizing it.
Okay.
But you're saying that the vast majority of carbon emissions come from natural events or phenomena. Human created carbon emissions constitute just a small percentage, and you're saying
Yes.
that has it still is a small percentage, even as over the past 2 to 3 centuries humans have exponentially increased their
Yes.
use of the environment.
Yes. And the other thing about it that I should mention, if we want a little more science, it's a nonlinear effect. That means the first carbon dioxide that goes into the atmosphere, long before we had industry, a bunch went into the atmosphere, has the biggest effect on the greenhouse effect and the biggest effect on temperatures. And then as you add more and more carbon dioxide, you have a declining effect. So today, if we double atmospheric carbon dioxide, either naturally or due to our industries, we're only going to see about a degree change. It's very, very small because it is nonlinear. And so that's another factor that indicates that nature, what's going on with the sun and the atmosphere and the oceans, is probably a much, much bigger factor than our small emissions of carbon dioxide.
I don't at all mean to beat a dead horse. And so forgive me, Mr. Gorman, forgive me, audience. I like to say that I keep up pretty well with most issues. At the climate one, I'm not as strong on. I just don't understand, just help me understand logically how it is possible that human beings, even with all of our use of the environment and all of our emissions, all of our technology, how is it possible that that hasn't had a big effect on the climate, as you're saying? I just don't quite understand that.
Because it's dominated by water vapor and it's dominated by existing carbon dioxide. Again, the theory is plausible, but the combination of we've had warmer times in the past. Matter of fact, now I tend not to stay back by 100,000, 200,000 years. There are many geologists that point out in our distant past, atmospheric levels of carbon dioxide have been 5 or 10 times what they are today. And that even occurred during ice ages. And so if carbon dioxide would cause a dangerous greenhouse effect or causing the planet to be on fire or anything else, it would have happened in those past times, but it didn't. So again, CO2 is very, very small. The great thing, by the way, we exhaust about 2 pounds a day when we all exhale. We burn sugars in our body and exhaust carbon dioxide. We should not be calling it a pollutant. It's great for plants. You know, if you're in California and you're a cannabis grower, you're smarter than the EPA. You know that you want to put carbon dioxide into your greenhouse to make your crop grow bigger and faster, and it does. Every plant on Earth grows bigger and faster with higher levels of carbon dioxide. Matter of fact, CO2 is the absolute best thing we could put in the environment for the biosphere. Yet today we have every university, every company counting their carbon dioxide footprint. Very, very foolish.
So it's that there's so much going on in the natural world that even human activity is just tiny amount of the contributing factor.
We should focus on real pollution issues, and we've been doing that for many years.
What are those?
My grandfather in the 1950s had a coal furnace and a coal bin in his house. And in Chicago, after it snowed, after about 4 or 5 days, you'd see a black film on top of all the snow from the coal dust. And a lot of your younger listeners might not know what spring cleaning was for. Literally every spring, people would wash the inside of all their walls to remove the coal dust. That was spring cleaning. But we put natural gas in our homes. We reduced particulate levels by 1,000. The EPA says that our airborne pollutants, nitrous dioxide, sulfur dioxide, ozone particulates, carbon monoxide down about 70% since 1980. Our volatile organic compounds coming out of our vehicle tailpipes are down 98% in the last 30, 40 years. So we've done a great job with pollution. The idea, though, that CO2 is a pollutant, that's where we've gone off base. And by the way, there's some other big environmental problems still to solve. 80% of the world's wastewater is still discharged untreated into rivers, lakes, and oceans. If you remember, about 6 years ago, the swimmers didn't want to swim in the Olympics down in Brazil because the water was so polluted. Brazil was just building the first water treatment plants. That's a big problem to be solved. Another one is plastic in the oceans. That's a somewhat overstated problem, but we have about 100 million tons of plastic in the oceans, and we're adding about 10 million a year.
Oh my gosh.
Mostly from developing nations in Asia. Banning straws in San Francisco is probably not going to have much of an effect. But we need biodegradable plastics. These are two big problems we need to solve, but not carbon dioxide. That again makes plants grow, and that's not causing dangerous warming.
To wrap up with Mr. Gorham, we're going to talk about the direction that we're heading in with all of these green new energy proposals and policies. But first, I want to quickly tell you about MyPillow. I use several MyPillow products, including the MyPillow, the mattress topper, the Giza Dream bed sheets, the My Towels, and of course, my favorite, the My Slippers. And you can get many of these products at a discount if you use the promo code Hartman, which is my last name, spelled Hartman. For a limited time, you'll get 60% off of the Giza Dream bed sheets. That comes with a 60-day money-back guarantee and a 10-year warranty. You'll get a set for as low as $39.99 with the promo code Hartman. Just go to mypillow.com and click on the radio listener square and use the promo code Hartman, or call 1-800-566-6745 and use the promo code Hartman. So it is no secret to anyone who is even slightly aware of what's going on in the world that we in the United States are barreling towards a green new future. Here in California, by 2035, the gas vehicles will be banned from, new gas vehicles, I should say, will not be allowed to be sold. Gas-powered trucks. In addition to that, that is also the case in New York. We are seeing this push away from fracking and drilling, but moving towards mining for electric vehicle battery parts, which seems a little bit confusing. So in addition to these new implementations that I mentioned, can you please give us a synopsis of some of the new green energy initiatives, and what do you think is going to happen as a result of this?
Right. So I think we're going to have a green breakdown that's coming, a failure of renewable energy. That's what my new book is about. As you know, the wealthy nations of the world have adopted a policy called net zero, and they all want that to be done by 2050 or earlier. And when I say wealthy nations, I mean United States, Europe, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and some others. Net zero means, or is supposed to mean, now, by the way, we emit carbon dioxide from everything we do. If you build a house, you emit it. If you're driving vehicles, if you're heating a house, if you have industry. And so the goal is to stop emissions of carbon dioxide from all of those processes, and then to capture with carbon dioxide capture and storage any areas that we can't reduce emissions. And so the world is barreling toward this. And as you say, this means for electrical power, it means wind turbines and solar cells. It means biofuels for our vehicles. It means electric appliances rather than gas appliances for our homes. And it means hydrogen or carbon capture and storage for our heavy industry. The problem is this is not going to occur. This is beyond a reach out goal. This is an impossible dream, a wish and a prayer. It's not going to happen. It is going to break down, but we're going to get four different things. The first is we're going to get higher energy prices. And we've already seen that in California. In the last 3 years, California passed up all of New England to have the second highest electricity prices in the United States, behind Hawaii. They have prices that are double any neighboring state in the West. And this is because of green policies. And the more that these are pushed, the higher these prices are going to go. The second is we're going to have electricity blackouts. I want to read you something from a commissioner by the name of Mark Christie for the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. He testified in front of the Senate in June. He said, quote, "I think we're headed for very dire consequences, potentially catastrophic consequences in the United States in terms of the reliability of our grid." And what he says and what is happening is we're closing coal plants too fast. In some cases, we're closing natural gas and nuclear plants too fast. And those are the things that keep the lights on. And we've already had some catastrophic blackouts. February 2021 in Texas, power was off for 72 hours. We had 4.5 million without power, and the estimates are that 700 people died. That is more than some of the biggest hurricanes we've had in history. We've also had blackouts in California and Oklahoma. And the more we put in intermittent renewables and we retire our dispatchable power sources, coal, natural gas, and nuclear, the more we're going to have these blackouts. The third problem is less freedom. As you say, in California, they're banning gasoline cars in favor of electrics. That is what the climate movement is pushing for, and also a ban of gas stoves in new construction. And the fourth is transnational energy shocks. We've just had one of those in Europe in the last 2 years. Europe is now paying more than twice the price, actually 4 times the price we are in the US for natural gas. The price of electricity is about 4 or 5 times as much. They've been counting on renewables and on natural gas and not traditional energy sources. So I think there's going to be a breakdown. What's going to happen is people are going to demand a return to low-cost, reliable energy, and that's going to happen over the next decade or two. It's not going to be easy, but eventually we're going to get back to a sensible policy.
Steve Gorham, thank you so much for coming on to Timeless. As a reminder, his book is called The Green Breakdown, The Coming Renewable Energy Failure. Mr. Gorham, where can people find your book?
So it's on Amazon. There are ebooks on Amazon, Google, Barnes & Noble, Apple, and also if they want a signed copy, they can go to my website, Steve Gorham, GOREHAM.com, and I'll send them a signed copy.
Why wouldn't you want to get a signed copy? That sounds great.
If you have a gasoline vehicle, if you have a gas stove, if you use electricity, you really need to read this book and find out what's happening.
Yes, and give your gasoline-powered car a kiss before it's taken away from you. Appreciate that you have it. Thank you again, Mr. Gorham. It's been great to speak with you. And as always, it's great to be with you. I'll see you soon. Take care.